because addiction is so prevalent. Mental illness is so prevalent in our community, and not only our community, but in every community. It's so prevalent, and it's not just going to go away on its own. If it's not addressed, it's going to get worse, because we're dealing with a disease that gets progressively worse. It doesn't get better on its own. If that person continues to use drugs, you're going to notice. There are going to be telltale signs. You will notice. So we have to have our eyes and ears open so that we can hear. Like they say, if you see something, say something. We can no longer sit back and act like these things are not happening, because it's happening and it's getting worse and worse and worse. And those are some of the things I will address when it's my time to speak. So, did that answer your question, sir?
Yes, it did, yes.
Okay.
I think one of the important things about what you said too is that he was really hiding things from the adults. The adults didn't really know a lot, but the peers did. And so being able to really encourage our kids, of course we don't want them to be tattletales over tiny things, but help them be able to realize too, when are things getting to a point where this is really out of control, and I gotta let somebody else know. Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Renee. So I have a question about the symptoms of autism. Is it sometimes confused with Asperger's?
So autism is a spectrum disorder, which means there's a whole spectrum of how people are affected by it, kids or adults. And so Asperger's is part of the autism spectrum, where they're higher functioning. They might not have an extreme symptom. They might not be dealing with some of these issues to an extreme, so they're able to be more successful in school in that they might just be more socially quirky. They just might not want to be part of, might be more uncomfortable with large groups of people, might not, might be lacking more in social skills, but cognitively, super smart in other ways. So it's, so that's kind of how Asperger's fits into the spectrum of autism. Does that make sense?
Well, because I noticed that the adult side of autism is more diagnosed with Asperger's than autism. So that's why I was wondering, is it because when they were younger they had the form of autism?
Yeah, very possibly. There could have been more social, there could have been more deficits at the beginning when kids are forced to have to fit into school, into other situations. Then as they become adults, they can find their place in areas where they're more comfortable. And, they might be somebody who's completely okay behind a cubicle, behind a desk, not having to interact and talk with people for quite a while, but able to be super successful at, their desk job, working on a computer, not interacting with people. But when kids are little, they're forced to interact in school, and so those deficits are more problematic then, and they might naturally find an avenue where they're not as challenged.
Yes, my question is, maybe it's more of a political question, but why do the state have facilities such as Madden mental health facility? At one time they had Reed, because my mom used to work at Reed mental health. Then she went over to Madden. So why do they have this facility for the youth who need help, and they give them drugs to succumb to issues instead of diagnosing them and having counseling, like the young lady here, you have to in the process of adjusting to it. Instead of sticking in the facility, putting them with drugs, then they come out looking like they don't know which way they're going.
So definitely, the fact of having, the fact of psychotropic medication, medication to help with behavior issues, with brain issues like that. Very definitely, we look at how much interference is the person having in their life. Like you said, if somebody is having like really violent outbursts, a medication might help to help calm some of that violence. If somebody is, again, there's all kinds of different levels on how intensely some anxiety, depression, how much some of it interferes with the person's life. So if it's super interfering, sometimes medication can be necessary and helpful for a while to calm the symptoms, so then some of these other things like cognitive behavioral therapy, occupational therapy, speech, working on sensory issues, so that some of these things can be helpful. A lot of hospitals, a lot of times people end up in the hospitals because things are at kind of a crisis point. So they might medicate them pretty highly then. And then if they get to a more stable point, hopefully that can be taken down some.
Yeah. I just like to say, in my nursing career, I've had to give a lot of medications to people that were maybe having disruptive behavior, or like she was saying, increased anxiety and some type of chemical imbalance that was going on in the brain. And sometimes it's necessary to give medication to help a person to get better. But the thing about medications is that all medications have side effects. And sometimes the side effects can look worse than the actual illness itself. And this is not just psychotropic medications. I've had experience with medications for cancer, chemotherapy, medication that, and then also have had personal experience with that, where my older sister had cancer, and the medication they were giving her was making her worse than how she was feeling anyway. And ultimately, we had to make a decision. Are we going to continue giving her this medicine or not? And so that's the decision that we had to make. But I say that to say medications have side effects. And sometimes we have to deal with those side effects. Sometimes they're temporary, and sometimes they're not.
And sometimes if there's a medication where there are where there are really intense side effects, sometimes there's a different medication
They
that
can
goes.
change, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing. There are different medications for one particular illness. So if this one doesn't work, it's important to let your physician know what's going on. This medicine, I'm not feeling right with this medicine, or, it's not helping me, or whatever challenge you're having with the medication. It's important to go back to your doctor and to let your doctor know. And I say that because I always tell people, you know your body better than anybody else. And you know if it's making you feel better or if it's making you feel worse. And these are things that you have to go back and you have to let the doctor know so they can make the necessary adjustment with the medication.
Yeah, sometimes people, of course it's not an easy decision to make, to decide, I'm going to take this medication. It's It's not an easy decision to make. And sometimes people take it right away and they're like, oh, this is making me feel bad, forget it, medication isn't going to work. Well, maybe that, please go back to your doctor and ask for one that works a little differently for your body. Yeah.
Yes, I would like to speak on,
There's a question all the way in the background to your.
I wanted to, two parts to the discussion that we're having. One part is the previous question on the spectrum where Asperger was discussed, particularly in adults. There's a book called The Best Practices, yellow cover. I'll ensure that I give it to you guys. It's actually a professional man given the encounter of how he can do his job flawlessly, but at home he wasn't such a good husband and a good father. And he and his wife actually processed what was happening in an interpersonal relationship. So sometimes we can look at someone on the spectrum and we can say, oh, they're fine, they're doing so good at school, they're doing so good at work. What do you mean? They're a doctor, they're a lawyer, it's impossible. But in their personal lives, they're suffering. And they don't even know it because they were never given the opportunity to exercise the muscles that Cindy was talking about earlier in childhood therapy that should have happened. And then on this aspect of medication, because I'm an individual who had to take psychiatric medication for a period of time myself, and I still do take medication for certain aspects. If you are not doing the work to go alongside with the medication, when you're dealing with your mental health, you're failing yourself, okay? What I mean by that is, if you are taking psychiatric medication, but yet still conducting yourselves and being in matters where you're being gaslit, where you're being manipulated, where you're being dominated, where you're being intimidated, where you're constantly battling against what brought you into that mental health issue in the first place, it's not going to be helpful because you're still in the same war. And that's why you can't just go in and say, Doc, give me a pill. You got to do therapy. You got to get with a counselor. You got to get the pill from the doc. And then the residual, you got to process with your pastor. It's a process to this. We cannot just continue to just expect one pill to fix 400 plus years of issues.
Absolutely, it is most effective to have medication and counseling work together. Absolutely.
Yes, I agree with that. Because it all works together. You need the therapy, you need whatever the support is that's going to help you. That medicine will get you stable. At some point you got to get stable so that you are able to engage in the other things that's available.
So you're in a place to be able to absorb it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just wanted to touch back on what James was saying about the mental health. It goes back. I'm a former mental health technician from Howard. So as he was saying about they put the young adults in the system, it's not the government that puts them in the system, it's the parents or who's ever responsible for them that puts them in the system. However, once they're in the system, there is a group of therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists. They have the tools that they need. They also have, they go to school there, so they receive their education there. When they turn 18, they're able to go into a SILA home, a SILA facility, where they receive their other education, where they get community stability, where they're able to go out and become adults into the world, and they're made whole. So a lot of them grow out of those facilities. They're not put into there to stay into there. So I would just like to clear that up. Yes, they get medication. Yes, but some of them, once they get that medication and they're done with that, the only thing that they're left with is their vitamins. And they're taking those on a daily basis. So they're not stuck on a pattern of psychotropic medication. They're left taking vitamins. So I just want to clear that up. They have a system in place for them when they go to those facilities. Even though the system isn't made for that, it is made for that. You understand what I'm saying?
100%. When kind of speaking to that, yeah, some of the residential or some of the overnight, some of the residential, some of the hospital programs, from the first moment that people enter and are accepted into those programs, that they're deemed appropriate for those programs, from the first moment, there's a treatment plan of what you need to do, how can we help you to get out of here. Very definitely, the goal is not to keep people there to have them become dependent, for sure.
And I'd like to say the treatment plan is not a one-size-fits-all. It should be individualized for that particular person. So we shouldn't lump everybody in the same. Okay, we shouldn't clump everybody in the same pot and say, okay, we're just gonna give everybody this treatment and it's gonna work for everybody, because that might not work, you know. So it's an individualized treatment plan.
And kind of speaking about treatment plans then, these are some of the different types of mental health therapy. These are some of the different techniques we use with counseling. There's one of the most common that you'll hear about now is cognitive behavioral therapy, identifying harmful thought patterns, replacing this thinking pattern with thoughts that result in more appropriate feelings and behaviors, being able to look at the glass as half full instead of half empty. So acceptance and commitment therapy, helping a person understand, accept their inner emotions. Interpersonal therapy, focusing on the behaviors and actions you have with family and friends with the goal of improving communication and self-esteem. Then there's art, expressive therapies, using drawing, painting, dance, music, movement, writing to help people express themselves. Motivational interviewing, a person-centered therapy that helps us be able to have the person say what is their motivation for treatment. It's going to be, of course, most powerful when it comes from the individual seeking care, right? And so this is helping the person have the internal motivation. Because, of course, things are going to be so much more powerful if it comes from yourself instead of somebody else saying, this is what I think is best for you. Play therapy, what we do a lot with kids. People think that all we do is work with toys, right? All we do is play, but there's always a method behind the madness. There's always, skills like cooperation, taking turns, distress tolerance, so many things that happen through play. So some of the goals that we might work on in counseling, building up coping skills. Coping skills is such kind of a general term. What does that mean? So those are some skills like deep breathing, positive self-talk, art, music, hobbies, exercise, getting the endorphins running to naturally help out some of our regulating ourselves. Enhancing communication skills, building up self-esteem, mindfulness, trying to be fully present in the moment, being able to observe and label thoughts, feelings, and body sensations in an objective manner in the moment, instead of kind of being fixated on the past or what's going to happen in the future. Being mindful about being in the moment. Grounding, turning attention away from thoughts or worries, refocus on the moment. One of the most common things here is sensory grounding. We have 5 senses, right? And so sensory grounding, if you're kind of getting really anxious about something, kind of trying to bring it back into, 5 things you can, 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things one thing you can smell, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. Just kind of trying to get that, when our mind is kind of, spiraling about something, trying to get us back to where we are and help us calm down. And then, of course, building resilience. So, when to refer for mental health services? When should a kid or when should an adult possibly seek out mental health services? If there's trouble in multiple areas of life, such as family relationships, academic performance, leisure activities, friendships, if there's a lot of trouble in those areas, starts feeling bad about himself or herself, less confident, less effective, showing excessive worry about the future, expressing hopelessness, withdrawing from family, friends, or activities you used to enjoy. That's what we were talking about, noticing differences in how people are acting. Having significant change in sleep habits or appetite. Engaging in negative behavior more frequently. Having repetitive, self-destructive behaviors such as hair pulling, skin picking, and talking or engaging in any kind of self-harm. Making comments like, I wish I wasn't here, nobody would care if I went away. Talking about suicide. So those are some of the times when